There is a song that three of the most powerful people in music decided you were never supposed to hear. Not because it was bad, not because it was unfinished, not because the timing was off, because it was too good. And something that powerful, buried in the wrong vault, becomes a threat to everyone who knows it exists. Baby Keem, Kendrick Lamar, Rihanna, same track, same session, fully mastered, studio quality, a polished, authenticated three-way collaboration sitting in a vault, locked, buried, erased from the official timeline, while the entire music world spent a decade begging Rihanna for new music. It existed, it leaked, and now someone very high up is absolutely sick to their stomach. Because what's on that track doesn't just change how you hear these three artists, it rewrites the entire power structure behind one of the most carefully constructed mystiques in modern music history. And once you see the web underneath it, the hidden creative pipelines, the ghost architecture connecting pgLang to Roc Nation at a level nobody publicly discusses, you will never hear Baby Keem, Kendrick, or Rihanna the same way again. Stay with me. This is not gossip. This is a psychological breakdown of a cover-up and the buried masterpiece at the center of it. Here is what you need to know fast. Baby Keem and Kendrick Lamar are not just label mates. They are not collaborators with a family PR angle stapled to the press release. They are blood, biological, generational. Keem's mother is Kendrick's first cousin, second cousins by blood, and Kendrick has spoken, rarely, deliberately, about understanding the hardship in their family, about watching what Keem's mother went through before Keem was even born. This is generational loyalty, the kind that doesn't negotiate, the kind that operates on a frequency this industry was never meant to tune into. Now add the next layer, because this is where the story stops being a family narrative and starts being an operation. Leaked documents and reference tracks that surfaced in late 2025 didn't crack a door open, they detonated the wall. And what they revealed changes the entire architecture of Baby Keem's catalog in ways the industry did not want examined too closely. Kendrick Lamar has been writing reference tracks for Baby Keem since at least 2018. Not occasionally, not as a favor, a full-scale creative pipeline flowing from one of the greatest lyrical minds in music history directly into his younger cousin's developing artistic identity. An entire discography's worth of creative DNA flowing from Kendrick's pen into Keem's catalog. Now, pause. Think about what that actually means. Every time you listened to Keem and felt something familiar, those cadences, the melodic instincts, the way certain phrases hit different, you weren't imagining it. Those fingerprints were literally Kendrick's in many cases. The genius wasn't just an influence, he was architecting the blueprint, recording the template, and handing it to his cousin to build upon. And before anyone reaches for the word ghostwriting like it's a grenade, stop. Reference tracks are standard practice. Pharrell, Timbaland, Max Martin, the greatest creative architects in music history have always demonstrated craft through recorded examples rather than just verbal instruction. This is mentorship at the highest level. But here is where this stops being about mentorship entirely. Because those same leaked files revealed something that connects directly to the buried record at the center of this story, something that should have stopped every music journalist cold. Kendrick Lamar also wrote reference tracks for Rihanna, 2 songs, OD and Trouble Me, both reportedly created around 2018, both fully realized recordings that Kendrick initially made for himself, decided didn't fit his own projects, and then sent directly to Rihanna as potential material. Engineers who analyzed the leaked audio described them as polished, production-ready, not sketches, fully constructed sonic offerings where Kendrick deliberately left space, room designed for Rihanna's voice to inhabit. One producer said he built the room and left the furniture out on purpose so she could choose what to fill it with. There's even a Caribbean Afrobeat texture to OD that multiple listeners describe as tailor-made for Rihanna's register. This wasn't accidental. Kendrick studied her voice. He engineered the fit. And that level of deliberate creative intimacy between two artists who have never publicly discussed any deep collaboration, that is where the psychological picture starts forming something genuinely unsettling. This wasn't random. Because for 10 years, Rihanna has held the music world hostage. Anti dropped in January 2016. That album just celebrated its 10th anniversary in early 2026 and was still setting streaming records, still cracking peaks on Billboard like it came out last month. That is not normal longevity. That is supernatural. And the reason it's supernatural is simple. Rihanna disappeared.
She became a billionaire. Fenty, Savage X Fenty, a family with A$AP Rocky. Music stopped being survival. It became leverage. Every year she didn't release, the mythology around R9 compounded. Every tease, every studio hint, every cryptic post added another layer to the most elaborate anticipation campaign in music history. In 2024, she confirmed she was ready to return. By 2025, she says she had cracked it, found the direction for R9, scrapped the reggae-inspired sound she'd been pursuing for years. Total reset. And then, February 2026, she posted an Instagram video. Actually in a booth, microphone in her face, the internet lost its mind. But still no release date, still no single, still more Rihanna being Rihanna. Now hold that timeline next to everything we just established. Kendrick is writing reference material for Rihanna. In that same window, a fully completed song exists featuring Baby Keem, Kendrick, and Rihanna. Mastered, polished, a guaranteed cultural earthquake, and none of it ever sees daylight. Rihanna scraps her entire album direction. The reference tracks get buried. The three-way collaboration gets vaulted. Something happened. Behind closed doors, in a studio, a boardroom, an encrypted group chat, someone decided this music needed to disappear. And the question that should be eating you alive right now is simply, why? This is where it gets dangerous. But here's what nobody is talking about. Not the leaks, not the reference tracks, not even the song. The thing nobody will say out loud is this. We are not looking at a single buried collaboration. We are looking at a system, a deliberately constructed architecture of hidden influence, and someone decided that architecture needed to stay invisible forever. Look at the full scope of who Kendrick has reportedly created reference material for. Keem, J-Rock, Schoolboy Q, SZA, Sir, Beyonce, Rihanna. You stop seeing isolated acts of creative generosity and start seeing something far more calculated, a power network. Kendrick's creative DNA threaded through some of the most significant catalogs in contemporary music, invisibly, strategically, in ways the public has zero visibility into. Now ask the question nobody in the press will ask directly. What happens if this becomes fully, publicly, documentably visible? Not hinted at, not theorized, but proven, laid out with receipts. Here are the reference tracks. Here are the final recordings. Here is how much of what you thought was independent artistic vision was flowing from one source. The ghostwriting conversation in hip-hop is radioactive. We watched what it did during the Drake-Kendrick war. Drake's reputation didn't collapse because his music was bad. It collapsed because the public felt deceived, because the mythology of solo creative genius, the thing that legitimizes the crown, had been pierced. Now apply that same dynamic to artists whose reputations are considered beyond critique, to an ecosystem where creative authority rests on the perception of authentic, independent identity. Kendrick doesn't want his fingerprints dissected on Keem's catalog to the point where his independence becomes a question. Keem doesn't want his artistry reframed as Kendrick's blueprint with a different voice on top. And Rihanna absolutely does not want anyone suggesting she needed Kendrick's pen to power her comeback. The buried track wasn't just a song, it was evidence. Evidence of a creative ecosystem operating at a depth the public was never supposed to understand. And releasing it, letting the world pick it apart, letting analysts trace the fingerprints back to their origin, would have opened questions nobody in that web was prepared to answer. So someone made the call, and the song disappeared. Until it didn't. Let me tell you what actually happens when you press play. The production enters first. Imagine it, layered, sitting at the exact golden intersection of hip-hop and pop, not the cheap version where credibility gets traded for radio play, but the expensive version, where the architecture is so confident it doesn't need to explain itself. Clean lines, rolling, infectious rhythm. You're nodding before a single voice enters the frame. Then Baby Keem slides in. Tell me you want me. That hook, that cadence, the specific way he delivers it, it's a parasitic earworm. It attaches to a node in your memory and refuses to leave. And Keem understands something fundamental about hooks that most artists spend their entire careers never figuring out. They don't need to be complicated. They need to be felt immediately in the chest. This one lands in the chest immediately. And then the atmosphere changes. You feel it before you hear it, like temperature dropping in a room before you consciously register it. Something is entering the frame. The pressure shifts. Then that voice, that one of one, instantly identifiable, there is no other human on this planet voice. Rihanna. And here is what nobody was ready for. Here is the moment that made everyone who heard this put their phones down and just stare. She doesn't just sing. She raps. Not a novelty, not a celebrity doing spoken word over a beat for content. Actual bars, actual cadence, actual flow. She comes in with an aggressive, controlled, surgical delivery, chopping the beat with the confidence of someone who has absolutely nothing to prove and is proving everything anyway. Every word lands with deliberate, precise weight, like she calculated exactly where each bar would cause maximum impact and placed it there on purpose. And just when your brain starts catching up to what your ears are experiencing, she transitions. Mid-verse, no warning, seamlessly. From rapping, that aggressive, forward-leaning, controlled violence delivery, into a falsetto. Pure, ethereal. A vocal run that belongs in a completely different sonic dimension from the bars that just preceded it. It is the musical equivalent of watching someone win a fight with their bare hands and then casually, without breaking eye contact, produce a weapon they never needed. She was already winning. The falsetto was because she could. And there is one moment, 2 words, just 2, where she says, "Say that." 2 syllables. And in any just and rational universe, those 2 syllables alone would have moved 1,000,000 units. That is not hyperbole. That is an accurate assessment of Rihanna performing at a level she has been withholding from the world for an entire decade. Now here is the genuinely wild part, the part that reframes everything. If you try to objectively rank the performances on this track, there is a legitimate, serious argument that Rihanna had the best verse. On a song with Kendrick Lamar. The man who ended Drake's career trajectory with a single record, the man who headlined the Super Bowl, the greatest lyricist breathing right now, and Rihanna might have bodied him. To be precise, Kendrick clearly made a conscious decision about his register. He walked in and chose groove over demolition, leaned melodic, leaned into the pocket rather than trying to dismantle it. There's a bar about people liking him when he wears his halo, but the mood not changing. That classic Kendrick duality. The righteous and the ratchet in the same breath. Even at 60%, the layering is there. The fingerprints are unmistakable. He is undeniably himself, even when he's not trying to decapitate anyone. But Rihanna did not receive the memo about the casual register. She showed up to a vibe session and conducted a professional execution. Slow, methodical, surgical. And before anyone fully processed what happened, she had quietly, gracefully overtaken everyone on the record. And Keem, melodic, structurally essential, hook-perfect Keem, did what makes him irreplaceable in this ecosystem. He held the architecture together. Without him, this is just a Kendrick-Rihanna feature. With him, it becomes a 3-headed organism where each head has a completely distinct personality, and all 3 share the same heartbeat. He is the glue. And he knew it. This track should not be in a vault. It should have a Grammy. It should have changed the trajectory of everyone's career the moment it came out. So why didn't it? 3 theories, not mutually exclusive. The most disturbing possibility is that all 3 are true at once, and the decision to bury this record was made at their intersection. The casino theory first. Keem's 2026 album is one of the most meticulously curated projects in recent memory. Every cut methodical, sculptured with the understanding that art is about restraint, not excess. This track doesn't fit that world. Putting it on Casino would be like hanging a Van Gogh in a perfectly curated modern exhibition. The painting isn't the problem. The painting is a masterpiece.
but it disrupts everything around it. And Keem was willing to sacrifice a guaranteed smash for the integrity of his vision. That level of artistic discipline is almost extinct at this level of the industry. But this theory has cracks because the production analysis places this record in 2018 or 2019, years before Casino was even a concept. This wasn't made for that album and removed. It was made and buried for different reasons entirely. Which brings us to the Rihanna factor, and this is the one that keeps me up. Think about this from her perspective, not as an artist, but as a strategist, because that is what Rihanna has been for 10 years. Not a musician waiting for inspiration, a strategist playing a decade-long game of controlled scarcity. Every year of silence made the mythology larger. Every year the demand for R9 grew more desperate, more urgent, more culturally massive. Now imagine she heard this track back, listened to herself rapping, transitioning into that falsetto, absolutely dominating a record with two of the best performers alive, and then made the calculation. If this comes out on Keem's album, in pgLang's world, on their timeline, it dismantles everything I have built.
It gives the world new Rihanna in a context she doesn't control. And Rihanna, above everything, is about control. She controls the brand, the narrative, the moment. She has been constructing the architecture of her return for 10 years. One leak feature, even a perfect one, collapses it overnight. So maybe it wasn't Keem's call. Maybe it wasn't Kendrick's. Maybe Rihanna looked at this record, knew it was one of the best things she'd ever recorded, and said, "Not yet, not like this. When I come back, it is on my terms." And the vault closed. The third theory is the darkest, and it requires stepping back from the music entirely. We have established the scope, reference tracks flowing from Kendrick to Keem, J-Rock, Schoolboy Q, SZA, Beyoncé, Rihanna, a system, a web of hidden influence touching some of the most sacred catalogs in contemporary music. Now ask, what happens when this becomes fully, documentably visible? Kendrick doesn't want his fingerprints dissected on Keem's work until Keem's independence becomes a public question. Keem doesn't want his artistry reframed, and Rihanna absolutely does not want anyone suggesting she needed another artist's pen to power her comeback. The buried track was evidence of an ecosystem operating at a depth the public was never supposed to access. Releasing it would have opened questions that nobody in that web was prepared to answer publicly. So someone, or multiple someones, looked at each other and made a quiet, collective decision. Not this one, but here is the reframe. Here is where the entire situation flips into something nobody anticipated. The burial was calculated to protect the mythology, keep the architecture invisible, let each artist maintain the perception of sovereign creative identity. But the leak didn't damage the mythology, it exploded it into something larger. Because the record is undeniable. And when something undeniable surfaces from a vault, when what was deliberately hidden turns out to be exactly as extraordinary as the people who hid it feared, the public doesn't feel deceived. The public feels cheated. Not by the artists, by the decision, by whoever sat in a room and said, "The world is not ready for this." By the risk calculation that placed self-preservation above art. By the vault itself. And that shift, from deception to deprivation, fundamentally changes the power dynamic of this story. The public is no longer the audience of a cover-up. The public is the victim of one. And there is nothing more galvanizing than discovering that something extraordinary was kept from you on purpose. Now Rihanna can no longer control the first impression of her return. That impression already happened, in a leak, without her permission, where she rapped with precision, sang with grace, and possibly outperformed Kendrick Lamar on his own terrain. Whatever R9 becomes, it will be measured against that. Kendrick's hidden creative architecture is no longer theoretical. It is documented, being analyzed. The conversation about where mentorship ends and ghostwriting begins is now open in a way that cannot be closed. And Keem, whose Casino showed a fully realized artist who needs no asterisk, now has to contend with a public that simultaneously knows the depth of his cousin's involvement in his development and watched him hold his own against Kendrick and Rihanna at their absolute peak. Which, if you actually understand what that means, is not a crisis for Keem. It is the most powerful argument for his legitimacy that could possibly exist.
being handed a blueprint by the greatest lyricist of your generation, and then still becoming your own artist, still developing a sonic identity that is irreducibly, unmistakably yours, that is not weakness. That is what it looks like when the process actually works. Casino is the transcendence. The leaked record is the documentation of where it started. But the question sitting underneath all of this, deeper than the theories, deeper than the career implications, deeper than the song, is the one nobody is fully confronting. If this was in the vault, what else is in there? We already know about OD and Trouble Me, completed Kendrick recordings, polished and production ready, sent to Rihanna and never officially released. There are unreleased Keem tracks with documented Kendrick involvement beyond the confirmed list. There are sessions between pgLang artists the public has zero knowledge of. Sessions that happened, were recorded, were mastered, and then went into storage because someone made a calculation. The vault is not one locked room. It is a network of decisions, artistic, strategic, protective, that collectively result in some of the most extraordinary music of our generation existing in permanent suspension. Not destroyed, not abandoned, held. And the terrifying implication of everything that has surfaced is that what we have seen is not the vault. What we have seen is a crack in the vault door, a narrow, imperfect view through a keyhole into a room stacked with music someone decided the world wasn't equipped to handle. Think about the standard of what gets buried. If the Keem Kendrick Rihanna track is representative of the minimum quality threshold for what gets vaulted, we are not talking about a few interesting rarities. We are talking about a parallel music history, a body of work that would rewrite the critical narrative of this entire era if it fully surfaced. And someone is sitting on it, watching these leaks surface one by one, making new calculations in real time about what gets released next and on whose terms. Rihanna is building R9. Somewhere in the architecture of that return, the question of what the public has already heard, what the vault accidentally gave away, is part of the strategic equation, because that is who she is. Not an artist waiting for the right feeling, a strategist playing a game most people cannot see from the outside. The leak changed the board. It played a piece she was holding without her permission. And now her return has to account for a public that has already experienced what she is capable of at a level she had not yet chosen to show. Which means R9 cannot be good. It has to be extraordinary. It has to make the leaked track feel like a prologue, a first glimpse into something even larger and more fully realized, because anything less will feel like a step backward from what the world now knows she can do. And Kendrick is watching all of this with the quiet, calculated patience of someone who built most of this architecture in the first place and is in absolutely no rush. Behind those eyes that always look like they're reading 3 moves ahead in a game everyone else is still learning the rules of, he is deciding what surfaces next, what stays buried, what gets deployed at the exact moment it creates maximum impact. Because that is how Kendrick operates, not reactively, architecturally. The vault is not a failure of the release machine. It is an instrument of long-game control. The leak was a disruption, a crack, a moment where someone, somewhere, for reasons we may never fully know, decided the world had waited long enough. But here is the thing about cracks. They don't close on their own. More files are out there. More material in encrypted storage, on hard drives in locations nobody is publicly discussing, documenting sessions and collaborations and completed records that have never been heard outside a studio in Compton or a boardroom in Manhattan. And every time another file surfaces, the same question gets louder. If this is what they were hiding, what else are they sitting on? Because based on the depth of this network, the quality of what they were willing to bury, the full scope of what we now know exists in that vault, this is not the end of the story. This is the moment right before everything accelerates, the moment where the cover-up becomes too large to maintain and the controlled narrative fractures at its edges. The moment where the people holding the keys have to make decisions they've been deferring for years. And if the pattern continues, the leaks, the documents, the authenticated files, the next release won't be a leak, it'll be an announcement. And when it arrives, when someone finally, deliberately, strategically opens the vault on their own terms, the question won't be whether the music lives up to the hype. The question will be, how much of what we thought we knew was always the story they wanted us to believe? Stay watching, because this has barely started.